It was a freezing night in Portland, the kind that makes you double-check your locks and curl up with tea. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when the doorbell rang, my stomach tightened. I opened the door to find a man standing there in a perfectly pressed suit, holding a folder like it was made of glass. He smiled politely, almost too calm for someone disturbing a stranger after dark. "Adrian Cole?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. "Yes," I said cautiously. He introduced himself as Jonah Brooks, a reporter. My first thought was that he had the wrong house. Then he held up the folder. "I've been following a trail of shell companies, offshore accounts, trusts, all leading back to something called Haven Rest and Cole Hospitality." He paused, his eyes steady on me. "I think you're the one behind it." I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, but I kept my face blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, though my voice betrayed a tremor. He didn't push, didn't raise his voice, just opened the folder and let the papers speak for him. Logos, contracts, signatures hidden in layers of companies I thought would never be traced. He had done his homework. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I leaned against the doorframe, exhaling. "You have no idea what you've just stumbled into." He tilted his head, waiting. Finally, I looked him straight in the eye and said it out loud. "Yes, it's me. Every hotel, every property, Haven Rest, is mine. I built it, and not a single person in my family has any clue." Jonah's eyes widened slightly, but he stayed quiet. It wasn't shock that I noticed. It was admiration, maybe even respect. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how heavy it felt to admit it. The people who should have believed in me first were the ones who laughed the loudest. They called my dreams childish. My own father told me I'd amount to nothing more than a maid cleaning up after real business people. I shook my head, feeling the sting of those words even now. So I stopped trying to prove anything to them. I built my own empire, in the shadows where their voices couldn't reach me. Jonah flipped the folder closed and asked, "Why keep it a secret?" I hesitated. The answer had always been clear in my mind, but saying it out loud gave it a different weight. Because they didn't deserve to know. They only wanted to see me fail. But now, maybe it's time they do see. Not because I need their approval, but because it's time for the world to know who really holds the crown. He nodded, almost like he understood, then handed me his card. "The Crown Summit in Chicago is coming up. Biggest stage in the industry. Maybe that's where the truth belongs." I closed the door behind him, my hands trembling, but my heart steady. For the first time in years, I was ready to step out of the shadow. I grew up in a house where appearances were everything. My father, Graham, used to sit at the head of the dinner table and remind us how important it was to look successful, even when there was nothing to show for it. He'd talk about the inn he once owned, the one that failed, and every time his voice carried the same bitterness, like the world had cheated him. My mother, Lila, was different. Her obsession was status. She wanted the perfect outfits, the right friends, the kind of house that made people whisper with envy. And then there were my siblings. Maxon was the golden child, reckless but adored, and Sloane was the obedient one, polished and proper. Exactly what my parents wanted me to be. And then there was me, the odd one out. As a little girl, I used to turn my bedroom into a hotel. I'd line up stuffed animals as guests, write little check-in cards, and even make a breakfast menu out of construction paper. I thought it was clever. My father thought it was ridiculous. "You can't live your life playing pretend, Adrian," he'd say with that dismissive smirk. "No one makes it big running hotels unless they're born into money." My mother would just sigh, as if I was an embarrassment she had to tolerate. Even Maxon and Sloane would laugh, calling me the maid of the family. But I couldn't help myself. I loved the idea of creating a place where people felt cared for. By the time I was 12, I was running a lemonade stand with punch cards. Buy 5, get 1 free. Kids loved it. I even convinced a neighbor to help me with deliveries. I was proud, but when I told my parents, they just rolled their eyes. "You waste too much time on these little schemes," my mom said. In high school, I got a job cleaning rooms at a roadside motel. It was grueling work, scrubbing bathrooms, hauling sheets, dealing with rude guests. But I loved it, anyway. I'd pay attention to which rooms got the best reviews and why. I kept a little notebook filled with ideas on how to improve things. At home, though, my parents would whisper about how embarrassing it was that their daughter was doing that kind of work. "What will the neighbors think?" was always their favorite line. When I chose hospitality management at Lakehurst University, my parents didn't just disapprove, they cut me off completely. I remember my father's words, "If you walk this path, don't expect a dime from us." And I didn't. I worked 3 jobs just to keep up with tuition, waiting tables, working late shifts at a cafe, and even tutoring. I barely slept, but I refused to quit. Looking back, I realized that was the moment my life truly became mine. Their doubts, their mockery, their silence, it all became fuel. They wanted me to fail so they could be right about me. Instead, I decided I'd build something so big they couldn't ignore it, even if they never gave me credit. When I finally left home, I promised myself one thing. I would never crawl back, no matter how hard it got, and trust me, it got hard. I was barely scraping by, living in a tiny studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's alarm clock every morning. I worked at a cafe during the day, cleaned offices at night, and spent every spare second buried in textbooks. My friends went out to parties, traveled, enjoyed their 20s. Me? I lived on instant noodles and kept a jar where I dropped every spare coin, labeling it someday. That someday came sooner than I expected. One of my professors, a sharp woman who had worked in hospitality for decades, noticed my obsession with details. She once told me, "Adrienne, you don't just see problems, you see solutions." That's right. She recommended me for a small internship at a struggling boutique hotel. It wasn't glamorous. The carpets were worn, the furniture mismatched, and the reviews online were brutal. But to me, it was an opportunity. I threw myself into it. I started with the little thing, rearranged the lobby so it felt welcoming instead of cramped, convinced the owner to let me run themed weekend packages. I even trained the staff on how to handle complaints with grace instead of defensiveness. Slowly, the reviews started to change. Guests mentioned how different the place felt, how cared for they were. The owner was stunned, and for the first time, I felt like maybe I was more than the girl everyone had dismissed. But with every success, I felt this ache in my chest. Because no matter what I achieved, my family didn't know. Worse, I knew if they did find out, they'd twist it. My father would say it was luck. My mother would sniff and call it small potatoes. They had always been that way, ready to tear me down before I could stand tall. So I made a decision. If they were going to doubt me anyway, I'd build my empire where they couldn't see it. I opened my first property under a name that had nothing to do with me. Haven Rest. It was just one hotel, but I poured everything into it. Every dollar I saved, every ounce of energy. I worked the front desk, the laundry, the marketing. Some nights I slept in the back office because I couldn't afford both rent and staff. But the hotel filled up, word spread, and soon I had enough to open another. It became an addiction, building, creating, expanding. Haven Rest grew into something I couldn't have dreamed of when I was that little girl running a pretend hotel in my bedroom. And through it all, I kept my name hidden. No press releases, no family connections, nothing that could tie it back to me. I wanted the world to know Haven Rest, not Adrienne Cole. I wanted to watch from the shadows as the people who had once called me a failure unknowingly admired the empire I built. For years, I kept my distance from my family. I didn't call, I didn't visit, and they didn't reach out either. It was almost like we'd silently agreed to erase each other, and honestly, I was fine with that. My hotels were thriving, I had staff I trusted, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But then, out of the blue, I got a message from Sloan. Just a short, clipped text. "Dinner at the house this Sunday. You should come. It's important." At first, I thought about ignoring it, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was that stubborn piece of me that still craved their acknowledgement. So that Sunday, I drove back to the house I once called home. Walking up those steps felt strange. The paint was peeling, the porch light flickered, signs of wear my mother would have never allowed before. I rang the bell, and when the door opened, my mom's eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. "Adrien," she said, her voice sharp, like the name was sour on her tongue. My dad appeared behind her, and his jaw tightened. At the dinner table, the air was thick with tension. Maxon was there too, looking smug as always, and Sloane kept her eyes down, fiddling with her napkin. I sat quietly, just observing, until my father cleared his throat. "Adrien, we're glad you came," he said, though the flatness in his tone told me otherwise. "Your brother has been helping us a lot lately. He's really stepped up." Then my mom chimed in, looking straight at me. "It's such a shame you never found a real career. We always worried you'd struggle. And here you are, still single, no family, no stability. You could have learned a lot from Maxon." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my hands trembling under the table. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, but she wasn't finished. "Honestly, Adrien, sometimes I wonder if you've just wasted your life. You never listened. You always thought you knew better. Look where it got you." For a moment, I just stared at her. After everything I had built, after every sleepless night, every risk I'd taken, this was still how they saw me. A disappointment, a failure. Maxon smirked and added, "Yeah, not everyone's cut out for success. It's nothing personal, sis." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. My heart was pounding, my throat tight. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table, to finally throw every truth in their faces. But instead, I forced myself to stay calm. I took a deep breath, pushed back my chair, and stood. "You think I'm a failure?" I said quietly, my voice shaking. "All right then, let's see how long you hold on to that belief." And with that, I walked out, leaving their stunned faces behind me. They had no idea that the empire they admired from afar belonged to the daughter they just tried to break again. That night, after walking out of my parents' house, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Their words kept replaying in my head like a cruel echo: failure, wasted life, nothing to show. The more I thought about it, the more a fire lit inside me. They had no idea who I'd become. They had no idea that the very empire they admired in glossy magazines and whispered about at social gatherings was mine. I had built it, brick by brick, and now it was time for them to see. I spent the next few weeks planning. I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own arrogance. My father had a charity gala coming up, one of those grand events where the family would show off their connections and influence. I knew it was the perfect stage. On the night of the gala, I walked into the ballroom in a deep emerald dress, my head held high. I wasn't the timid daughter they used to mock. I was someone else now, someone they couldn't control. People turned their heads as I passed, and whispers spread quickly. My hotels had been making headlines lately, though my family clearly hadn't connected the dots. I spotted my father near the stage, shaking hands with a politician, while my mother clung to his arm like a prized ornament. Maxon, as always, was surrounded by sycophants, bragging loudly about deals he hadn't even closed. None of them noticed me at first, but when the event director approached me with a warm smile and said, "Miss Adrienne, we're honored you could make it tonight," I saw my father's head snap in my direction. I didn't look away. I smiled, walked straight to the stage when they announced me as the evening's keynote sponsor, and took the microphone. My voice didn't shake this time. "Good evening," I began, my eyes sweeping over the crowd, then landing on my parents. "I'm Adrienne, founder and CEO of Harbor Nest Hotel. Some of you may have stayed with us. Some of you may have partnered with us. And tonight, I'm proud to say that Harbor Nest is officially sponsoring this beautiful event." Gasps rippled through the room. I caught the look on my mother's face, shock mixed with disbelief, while my father's expression hardened like stone. Maxon's smug grin melted instantly. I continued, my tone steady. "I grew up being told I wasn't enough. that my dreams were too small, or too reckless. But I want to tell every young woman here tonight, your worth isn't defined by who doubts you. It's defined by what you build when nobody believes in you. The applause was loud, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was my family's face. They had wanted me to sit quietly at their table, ashamed and invisible. Instead, I was standing above them, commanding the room, and in that moment, I knew they could never call me a failure again. When the gala ended, I didn't rush to my car or try to avoid them. I wanted them to come to me, and they did, just like I knew they would. My father was the first to approach, his jaw tight, his eyes burning like he couldn't decide whether to be furious or impressed. "Adrien," he said, his voice low but sharp, "you could have told us." I looked him straight in the eye. "Told you what? That the failure you mocked built something bigger than anything this family ever touched. That the girl you dismissed now owns the kind of success you only brag about at parties." His lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't answer. My mother stepped in then, trying to smooth things over. "Darling, we just didn't realize. We thought you were struggling." Her voice shook, the way it always did when she knew she was caught. I almost laughed. "Struggling? You mean when you called me pathetic for renting an apartment instead of buying a mansion? When you said I was wasting my time because I wasn't following your blueprint of success?" That wasn't concern, Mother. That was pride talking. Maxon finally appeared, his smugness replaced with a kind of desperation I had never seen before. "Adrien, come on. You could have told us you were behind Harbornist. We could have partnered. Think how strong we'd be together." I turned to him, my brother who had never missed a chance to humiliate me. "No, Maxon, you don't get to stand beside me now. You don't get to share the work you once mocked. I built this without you. Without any of you." The silence after that was heavier than the music still playing in the background. I let it stretch. Let them feel it. For once, I wasn't the one squirming. Finally, I leaned closer to my father and said quietly, so only he could hear, "You called me nothing. Remember that. Because from this point on, every time you see Harbornist, every time you hear my name, you'll know exactly what nothing looks like." He didn't respond. He couldn't. His power over me was gone, and he knew it. As I walked away, heads turned, eyes followed, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight that lifted from my chest with every step. I wasn't their shadow anymore. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the easy target. I was me, stronger, louder, and untouchable. That night, when I finally got home, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. For years, I had chased their approval, their acknowledgement, their love. But now, I didn't need any of it. I had built something bigger than their opinions. And for the first time in my life, I whispered to myself with a smile, "You made it. On your own terms." The girl they once called a failure had become the woman they could never ignore.